Sean Penn was at the Berlin Film Festival last month for the premiere of his new documentary about the war in Ukraine. He's been an outspoken hawk since the start of the war last year, of course, but last week he appeared on CNN to urge the Biden administration to send more weapons to Ukraine, including those F-16 fighter jets that Zelensky requested. So let's hear from Mr. Spicoli. What is it, 30, 40 years later?
Hey, bud. Let's party.
Let's party.
Sean, thanks so much for joining us. So you've said this, and I'm quoting you now. Let me read the quote. The Ukrainians are going to fight till the last drop of blood, and that drop of blood will be on our hands if we don't faithfully equip them. How badly do you believe Ukraine really needs these fighter jets?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is, having just returned from Ukraine about 10 days ago or so, is that the impact of President Biden's trip was extraordinary. I mean, that's extremely encouraging. I think that that one of the things that's concerned me, and I think.
By the way, you see on the back of that lady's shirt there, it says CORE. That's Sean Penn's sort of NGO. He used to do things like help Haitians after the earthquake with that. Now he uses the NGO to egg on World War III, But yeah, that's his organization.
That there's no question, but that they need more ammunition, more long-range precision weapons, and yes, fighter jets. The issue really is that right now they're dying. Every day they're dying. So what we are waiting for seems to still be attached to this, I would argue, overcautious concern related to nuclear weapons, because
an overcautious concern related to nuclear weapons. Sean Penn says, hey, don't worry about nuclear war. We already have 2 nuclear powers involved in this conflict. China's signaling they're about to get in there. But, let's not be overly cautious, right? Let's not be worrywarts about this.
I've seen psychoanalysts whose analysis of Hitler was that part of his pathology was that he saw him and the German state as one. That that if it triumphed, he triumphs, and if it fails, he fails. I think Sean Penn has done that with his career and Ukraine. I think he's connected his career to the advances and losses of Ukraine. That might be why he's so emotional in this segment. Because he's seeing his career going down the tubes. But if Ukraine wins, then he wins, right?
Could be. He's willing to risk it all, obviously, just as the Ukrainians are willing to risk it all. It tells us don't worry about it. But here, he has more to say why we shouldn't worry about it.
Just concern related to nuclear weapons, because for one thing, if we're going to live in a world where a bully with nuclear weapons runs the show, there was a.
Well, I'm sorry. If we're going to live in a world where a bully with nuclear weapons runs the show, if we're going to live in that world, excuse me, we already do live in that world, except we're the bully with nuclear weapons that runs the show. This is the blind spot of all these people from minute one.
Yeah, you're being really unfair. I understand there was an accident on set during the filming of Falcon and the Snowman. He got hit right in the part of the brain that processes irony. So
maybe
it's like face blindness, like any kind of irony. Sean Penn is just blind to it.
This has been the blind spot of liberals and people like liberals from minute one of this war. The day the war started, we did a live stream on Facebook. We weren't even on YouTube at the time. And we started saying, well, if we want to hold Russia to account for this, what that means is that we must imagine a world in which nuclear-armed bullies are held to account for their bullying acts, which means we would also have to be held to account for ours. And people come back with whataboutism, right? The made-up word that liberals use to excuse themselves when they get called out on their shit. That's right, whataboutism. Yeah. No, it's not a question of moral whataboutism. It's actually a very practical question. If you want to live in a world where Russia is held to full responsibility for invading Ukraine, then that must it not, the same world in which we would be held accountable for our crimes? And is that a world that any of these people, including Sean Penn, are prepared to live in? Are you prepared to live in a world where the United States looks and feels nothing like it does now? Because that's the world you're advocating if you're actually advocating for a world where nuclear armed powers can't have their way with smaller countries. And that's the thing that they just miss. It's not a moral whataboutism question. It's actually a very practical question about the world you want to live in. And it's a world that these people cannot even begin to conceptualize.
Well, and let me posit why they're not able to conceptualize it. Because these people, if we're talking about liberals, who are so fond of the term privilege, have the privilege of being from a country where do as we say and not as we do has been the order of the day for several decades. For example, by the standard that you're setting, our war criminals would go to The Hague too.
Exactly.
But they don't. So they have such a privileged mentality as Americans that it never occurs to them, just like it never occurred to Sean Penn, that we are the bully that he is describing. That didn't even cross his mind. That is American privilege in a nutshell.
Absolutely. All right, let's let him keep going.
A former intelligence officer I'd spoken to in Ukraine at one point, he said, you know, he doesn't want to live in that world, and Ukraine won't. And so...
Oh, Ukraine won't. Ukraine won't. I'm sorry, sir. Ukraine has to, because we all have to, because this is called a civilization we are trying to maintain here. Okay, since when does Ukraine get to say, not just to Russia or to us, but to the entire world, hey, sorry, we're not willing to live in a world where nuclear armed powers can push us around. And so every living creature on this earth must roll the dice with a nuclear apocalypse because we simply won't stand for this. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry. Who put them in charge of the fate of the planet?
Well, and they're talking very big with other people's weapons and money. It's what my grandfather used to say. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't ask for anything. As soon as you ask for something, you make what you're doing the business of the person you're asking. You're asking us for this money. You're asking us for these weapons. That makes what you're doing our business. Now, you can have this stand, I won't live in that world. Guess what? The United States cuts you off, you're going to live in that world. I bet you'll find a way. I bet you'll find a way to accommodate and adjust to that world you're going to be living in without our support. So the idea that it's somehow immoral for the country that's underwriting this to question it is absurd, and that's the narrative they've built to try to shut down debate.
Well, absolutely. But I would argue, yes, we are the country that is mostly underwriting this in terms of the material financial support that we are providing them. But in a broader sense, every person on Earth is underwriting this because every person on Earth has skin in the game when you start talking about nuclear exchanges, right? So like every person on Earth has a vested interest in a peace deal being brokered here, right? So they're not, I mean, yes, they are asking something material of us, but they're also asking everyone on Earth to risk an apocalyptic event over their territorial disputes with Russia. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
I'm sorry. We're not going to go for that. The world is not going to go for that.
Well, Jeff Spicoli says we're exaggerating the risk of nuclear war. And who would you trust more than Sean Penn to assess the risks of nuclear war in this situation?
I'm so wasted.
I just think we have to make a clear decision to start saving lives, saving infrastructure, and what that means is supplying the Ukrainians. They have no interest.
No, that's the complete opposite of what that means. Saving lives and saving infrastructure means wrapping this war up and getting a peace deal inked so that lives and infrastructure are not continually destroyed by the Russian army. It's just a complete perversion of reality to suggest that like people advocating for peace are anti-Ukraine. No. The people being brutalized by this war are the Ukrainian people which are the cannon fodder in this proxy war. So if you really want to save Ukrainian lives and Ukrainian infrastructure, we'll wrap this war up and get a peace deal on paper and signed.
Right.
The idea that giving them more weapons is preserving their lives and their infrastructures is completely backwards.
Well, not to mention that in terms of the overall international geopolitics of this, we're just punching ourselves in the dick. We have created a situation where we are accelerating a process that might have taken place anyway. There's a decent chance it would have. But basically, the rest of the world figuring out how to develop an economic and diplomatic system that does not rely upon the United States. You have just hyper-accelerated that the way COVID hyper-accelerated work from home trends.
Exactly. Right.
That's what you're doing. Now China, Russia, South Africa, even India, they're all figuring out, Brazil, they're all figuring out how to do a global economy without us. Look, before we had lethargy working in our favor. The dollar, it's been the reserve currency for so long. It's going to take so much to go off the dollar. But now you gave them an incentive. And now they're doing it. Now they're learning how to survive without the United States. You are making the United States no longer an indispensable nation. And guess what? Nobody benefits from the way that the United States uses its position to rig the game in its favor than the fucking consumerist libs do. The Ukrainians don't want to live in a world where Russia gets the Donbass and the Crimea. Well, I promise you, libs, you don't want to live in a world where the dollar is not the reserve currency and you're carrying around a wheelbarrow to get some fucking Wonder Bread.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. 100%.
Interest in having Americans or others in the fight. They're ready to take the fight themselves. And their ability to transition on these platforms, be it the F-16s or when it comes to the Patriot, is not, I don't think there's been an honest conversation about how quickly.
I'm sorry. Does that hat you're wearing, I know there are military colors on that hat, but I believe the font on that hat reads Killer Tacos. I think that's a hat from a taco stand in Hawaii. Which means you're not in a position to predict how quickly the Ukrainians can adapt to flying F-16s and using Patriot missile systems. I mean, who are you to say, oh yeah, they'll learn it really quick, don't worry about that?
Well, not only that, I heard some of the workers come out and say this is stolen valor because he never even worked there.
Right, exactly. Never even worked at Killer Tacos.
They can transition. I think there's a lot in the air about how long it takes, how maintenance, fueling, all of that. But there are a lot of many ways in which that can be, sped up tremendously.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure he knows exactly how long it's going to take them to learn to fly the F-16s. Yeah,
he's an expert.
The expert.
He worked on a Tom Cruise movie once.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's interesting because, Russell, you talked about this when we did the live stream version of this segment about the sort of shut up and sing contingent on the right, about how conservatives have been lamenting the sort of activist sect of Hollywood for a long time. And, we tend to overlook that when certain actors, celebrities, musicians take our side, like Susan Sarandon, right? But you argue that they're perhaps onto something that we weren't.
I think they should shut the fuck up. For one thing, and we've talked about this when we covered Maverick. One of the reasons Tom Cruise is the last movie star is because nobody knows what his politics are. The one time Tom Cruise told you what he thought, he started jumping up and down on the couch about Scientology. That almost destroyed his career. It took him a very long time to come back from that. And now people have decided to put that in the drawer. And it's Tom Cruise, and let's just enjoy Tom Cruise, and let's forget that little Scientology incident. It has not been to the benefit of Hollywood. It has not been to the benefit of actors to have such instant ability to communicate. You know, we used to talk about how horrible the studio system was. You know what? Maybe the studio knew what it was doing when it told Joan Crawford to shut the fuck up and act. Can you imagine what Joan Crawford might have been tweeting? Right? We remember people like Humphrey Bogart and all of these people very fondly because they didn't have Twitter. Right? It's a combination of these very narcissistic, egocentric, and generally not the smartest knives not the sharpest knives in the drawer people who comprise the community of actors, expressing opinions on things that they don't know anything about. Look, this is my experience with actors overall, and there are some exceptions. Actors have good ones have a tremendous capacity to emote, to convey emotion, and also to pick up emotion. Like if you're feeling something and you're around good actors, it's very hard to hide it. Like that's where they live. That's where they live. They live in the world of feelings and intuitions and emotions. And but then you ask them about a historical event that occurred 10 years ago. They have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Like generally, that is just not their forte. It's just not where they live. It's not how their minds work. Every time I did a show that had a historical context, I had to be a history teacher. They didn't know anything about things like that. So that is what I see. When you see Sean Penn talking about how the risk of nuclear war is exaggerated, and yeah, they can get up to speed on the F-16s very quickly. It's that combination of the general ignorance that you find very often is a trait of actors, because these kinds of facts and data points it's just not where their heads are. It's just not what they're really interested in. Combined with this very inflated sense of oneself, that actor ego, that narcissism, that belief that even though you know nothing about this, you're qualified to talk about it. And okay, when you think about what an actor does, you can see how that would be a benefit, right? If you've got to go play a superhero, you're not a superhero, right? The ability to talk yourself into the idea that you can convey that is something you'd want in an actor. It's not something you want in somebody in the middle of a conflict that could potentially lead to World War III.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing, is you need to have some humility. Like, I'm not against people speaking out if they are informed. It's not in your wheelhouse. If they're informed on the issue that they're speaking out on. The problem is when you become a movie star and you gain 5 million social media followers in 24 hours simply by the fact that you joined Twitter as a movie star. And Sean Penn is not on social media, right? So we're not talking about him. I'm just talking about, like, more broadly. You then have a microphone, and then whatever opinion you espouse on global politics, war and peace, automatically gets you the same following that you got because you are a movie star. That's the danger. Right. So if you get informed on a topic and you become an expert on it and you want to talk about it, fine. But the reason Sean Penn is on CNN is not because he's an expert on it. He's on CNN because he's Sean Penn. And he did a documentary on the early days of the Ukraine war, which he was able to do because he's Sean Penn and he could get the funding for it, right? Yada, yada, yada. So this perspective that he's putting out there is, of course, just completely speculative, number one. He has no idea. He has no better idea than anybody how fast they're going to be able to learn how to fly F-16s. And he has no better idea than anybody what the nuclear threat actually is. And the experts, because I know the libs love to trust the experts on these matters, say that we are closer to a nuclear Armageddon now than we have ever been. So those are the facts of the matter.
Please clap.